I still think that making a product that you can kind of, picture across to my left, making a product that's so visual and, it makes such an impression when you kind of finish it. I think people get quite proud about that. And I think, even if it's not sailing, it's that kind of thing. We make a physical thing. One of the great things about manufacturing, isn't it? You make a physical thing, which at the end of the day, you can handle and hold and share and see and celebrate and all that stuff. And I think, if it's not the sailing, which I'm sure it is for lots of people, for the people it's not, it's probably the, that kind of stuff, the culture.
A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. Today I have Richard Lott, CEO of the North Sales Group, newish resident to Connecticut, but a super long-term and interesting business. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you're very welcome. And it's the Made in America podcast. So we always start off with the same two questions, Richard. What do you make and why do you make it?
Yeah, well, we're called North Sales Group, and we make sails, S-A-I-L-S, for boats, essentially. And we make them because, a huge number of people in the world love to get out in the water and sail boats. And we've been going 60 years, and, we make the best in the world, and we make them in Connecticut. Yeah,
we sure do. We're going to get to that. I want to talk about the Connecticut operation. Something that we talked about before was, you're a global business because sailing is certainly global, but relatively small for the footprint you have geographically. So that probably poses some, interesting management and production challenges. So I'm interested to get into that. I believe that every America's Cup winner since 1987 has been sailing under a North Sails sail.
Yep.
So I think some quality products, we certainly can talk about that. You've been leveraging some of the ingenuity, the know-how, and some of the partnerships we have here in Connecticut. So I certainly want to talk about that. But I really like to start off kind of on the personal front. And I'd like to hear, maybe you could share with our audience, how did you get into manufacturing? How did you get into sailing? Kind of what got you to where you are today?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. Well, that starts from really a long time ago. So I am, as you can tell, I'm not from around these parts. I'm British. So I grew up on the south coast of England in a town called Poole in Dorset, which has the second largest natural harbour in the world after Sydney Harbour in it. And my parents sailed. They learned to sail in Hong Kong, actually. And then as I grew up, taught me to sail, and I got quite passionate about sailing then. Sailed through my school years, went to university, did a chemistry degree, which could kind of come back to later. Still sailed a lot, quit school for a bit, actually, and did an Olympic campaign, but I'm not quite good enough to make it in the Olympics. So after I did that, I kind of got into business. Was in business in the UK for quite a number of years. I married a good Kiwi girl who I met in a pub in London. Went after a few years, took my family or young family to New Zealand. Never having worked in the marine industry at all, actually, but having worked in all sorts of financial industries and business sort of spaces in that time. And then helped a friend out who had an investment in a boat company in New Zealand. Through that, got into a company that made masts for boats. From that business that made masts for boats, sold that to North Sails. Got to know the North Sails guys, began running one of their companies in New Zealand. After 6 or 7 years doing that, they said, would you come and run the group in the US? Came to the US 5 years ago. All of these kind of businesses use a bit of the chemistry science that I kind of learned as a university student. So, one thing led to another, and here I am.
And here you are, absolutely. So actually, I want to talk about something because it's really interesting. You've got two things sort of happened here, right? You sort of had the serendipity of having a family that was really into sailing. And we've had another kind of sailing manufacturer based here in Connecticut, to mention Polyant. And there's also some sort of passion in sailing that went into the people in that business. And you also happen to get a chemistry degree. So I think maybe the two things would be, maybe you could share with the audience, how does sailing, your passion for sailing, and chemistry come together?
Gosh, how do they come together? Well, I don't know. They did come together in the beginning. It's one of those things. Maybe the chemistry's been useful on the way. I think one of the answers is sailing is quite a technical sport. And you kind of do it because you love the feeling of being out in the fresh air and the sunshine, and the salt air and all that sort of stuff, and it makes you feel good. But actually, when you kind of get in the sports side of it, it gets quite technical and quite scientific. And I suspect that's the link. It gets quite scientific. You learn that numbers matter, the way that materials behave matters. All the other things like building a team matter too, but all those things that kind of, maybe that's the link between that and chemistry. And I mean, to be honest, I chose my university because I wanted to go sailing, and it was right by the water.
Is that right?
Yeah, right. And I chose chemistry degree because I didn't really know what else to do, because like many students who are that age, they don't really know what to do. But it's all worked out. I mean, it's worked out, and I don't say I use chemistry every day, but I definitely do use it more than I kind of like to let on in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting that I don't know how much people really know how technical sail making is. I think people that maybe don't sail, and I'll count myself among them, and I've learned a lot about it through our conversations, through research on this podcast and other ones we've done on this. But I think a lot of people look at sails out in the water or, on TV, and they sort of feel like, oh, there's this like giant cloth that they've just figured out how to get the wind. But when you really get into sailing, it isn't just a giant cloth at all.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in a way, we at North try and kind of straddle from the kind of low end of the sport to the high end of the sport, which sounds, that's perhaps the wrong way of putting it, but at one level, it is just a piece of cloth that catches the wind. But as you like everybody, we all like to drive a slightly faster car or whatever. So, if you want to drive a slightly faster boat, you get a bit more technical about it. And that piece of cloth that catches the wind has to be the right shape, and then you want to spend the right amount of money. So you want it to last a long time. So if you want it the right shape and it lasts the right amount of time, it has to be more technical than something that's just, a piece of sort of, bed linen stitched together into a big sail, which is where, that's where sails started out, not that many years ago. So, it's quite a technical thing these days. And the sport has developed, like motor racing and things, into some parts of the sport being super technical, having a lot of money spent on, that last 1%, 0.5%, 0.25% of speed or whatever, and those areas, people have disappeared down rabbit holes and examined every possible technical advantage that could exist. And
well, you're going to have to get technical, right? Because everyone theoretically is racing with the same wind on the same seas. We have the same, materials to make it out of. So to start finding an advantage, you got to, if you want to find those advantages, you got to kind of go down those rabbit holes, I think.
That's one of the parts of sailing, though, because sailing is, one of the parts is the super technical sail piece. People have sailing skills and can feel the wind and, have a natural affinity for the water and how the boat behaves in the water. People are great at building teams, and most sailing is a team sport, so you've got to get other people on your boat to do stuff that they might find uncomfortable or whatever. So, I think sailing's a really broad, I know if you talk to lots of sailors, they say it's a really broad life lesson. A lot of life is out there on the water.
Certainly that is something that sailors do sort of say. Before we ask you about kind of the broad business, I want to ask you something kind of personal. A lot of people have talked about find something you're passionate about and sort of invest your time in it. It's way easier to be great at something you're passionate about. And other people sometimes comment that if you spend something that you sort of find all this joy in as like doing the day-to-day work, maybe it dissipates the amount of joy and it makes it more of a job. I wonder where you fall in that debate. Having been someone that as a kid made a decision about where to go to school to sail and then ended up sort of through life's twists and turns doing sailing. Where do you see that?
I can sit on both sides of that fence, actually, because I'd never worked in sailing until I went to New Zealand and began working in the sail industry. So I kind of had judged it from that point of view. I actually probably did way more sailing in those days than I do now, but I'm not typical of the people within North Sails. A lot of the people within North Sails do a lot of sailing still. I'm a little bit untypical, but I think that's just down to my time in life. I'm at that point where I've just had my kids and, kind of growing through that, and I've moved around the world a lot, which has made it harder to sail. I think, once you're a sailor, you're always a sailor, and I enjoy my job because it involves the sport that I'm passionate about. I love being on the water. I love the way it, clears your mind. The whole environment is hugely uplifting.
Working in sailing has in no way diminished your love of the sport.
Oh, no way, absolutely. Completely the opposite. Completely the opposite.
It's just developed it even more.
I love it. I love being able to talk to people go to talk to people in my day-to-day job about technical things that I find interesting, or and I get to sail on some incredible boats sometimes. So, I mean, I'd never have done that if I didn't work in it as well as sail in it, because I'm an okay sailor, but I'm not a great sailor.
Right. So it's really worked out.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's really cool. So let's sort of orient the audience on what the North Sales Group looks like. How many locations do you guys have around the world? What's the employee count? Let's kind of orient a little bit.
Yeah, so we have North Sales is actually more than one business. We have North Sales, which is the biggest company in our group, which is a bit over 100 million of sales. And then we have North Kiteboarding, which is the kiteboarding arm of our business, which is about half that size. We have a clothing business, which came off our technical expertise in fabrics, which is again about half that size. And then we have in the kind of sailing space, we have a mast making business, which is the biggest mast maker in the world, based down in New Zealand. And then finally, we have in our portfolio Edgewater Powerboats, which is actually a powerboat business based down in Florida. And we have 50-ish countries in the world that we trade out of, and 10 to 15 which we're really have a big presence in, either manufacturing or perhaps management or whatever in those countries, depending on the businesses. And we have about 2,000 people in total employed by us, and about 1,000 of those are in Sri Lanka, where we have a big production site for the sail making and for some of the mast products. And then the rest are spread all around the world. And we have our global management out of Connecticut. It's been a Connecticut business, not quite since the very beginning, but since almost the very beginning. And our main management group is based here. And we're actually owned by a British company these days, but still very, very much firmly, if you ask people, they say North Sales an American company.
That's that's sort of the global scuttlebutt. It's an American company. Yeah. So talk about the challenges of managing huge amounts of production so far away from where you are, right? I mean, you've got 1,000 people in Sri Lanka. That's, I don't know the exact math, but it's not close to Bridgeport.
Yeah, no. It's I mean, it's as in all businesses, it comes down to the people. I mean, and I think it's one of the great things about sailing. Actually, one of the wonderful things about sailing is because it's a slightly technical sport. People get passionate about it, and the people that get passionate about it are generally, pretty good operators, and as a result of that, we get to employ some amazing people around the world who perhaps have more skills than even our scale would imply. It's we lots of people in the business, are passionate sailors, and so we rely on those people around the world to make the business tick. We have passionate sailors in every country, and they're what make the difference. And it's not, it's one big business. It's really not one big business. It's actually a collection of small businesses, each run by incredibly entrepreneurial people in each country. And I always have a challenge. How much is, one, kind of one entity, and how much is down to the individuals in those countries. But it's a combination of both.
How do you think about managing that? For people that are listening that may have similar challenges, right? Because whether it's different businesses or different lines of business within the one business, how do you think about maintaining that entrepreneurial spirit, some independence, but somehow also leveraging the scale of being one big brand?
So that question if the answer to that question has changed enormously over the past 3 years because of what we've had going on. So I would say 3 years ago, by an awful lot of travel. It's important to get to people are very self-motivated if you give them a big goal and a clear direction, but you still need to meet them and stay in touch and reinforce those goals and so on. And one of the ways you could do it was going and seeing them. Now that everybody, even people, I'm 55 and I count myself at the top end of the age for computer literacy, but if people my age and older, and we have older people in the business too, are very literate with Zoom or Zoom equivalents, so you can stay in touch a lot more easily than you ever could. And I was kind of a skeptic about hugely distributed businesses and the ease of making them a success until 2 or 3 years ago. But we've been forced into it where, we're lucky in that a lot of the people have been in the business a long while, so they kind of know what their North Star is and they know the direction they're headed in, but also that the ability to kind of communicate using virtual means is, has made a huge difference. So, you give people a North Star, you hopefully agree on what that direction should be, and our direction is to give people an incredible sailing experience, depending on slightly on which bit of the business in, but essentially that, and so people pretty clearly know what they need to do that, and, employ the right people, and then they mostly do it themselves.
When you look across the business and you think about, so one of the opportunities for sure that we've seen is to leverage technology to communicate in some ways more frequently. And I think people that are listening who've experienced it is, it's funny you say Zoom or Zoom equivalent. I feel like Zoom has taken on the Kleenex, right? It's sort of become it's like the Google of searching, right? Whatever.
Right.
But in any event, I think people have found that to be able to see someone and do it, digitally, whether it's Teams or Zoom or whatever, that you can close a huge amount of the gap from a travel, especially for people that have been there. So there's been some huge opportunities. But I'm curious if you've seen some of the same risks that we've seen from talking to other businesses, which is, whether we call it the Great Resignation or people sort of making changes in their lifestyle and making big moves. Have you guys found in the North Sales Group some of the retention challenges that we've seen across lots and lots of other businesses throughout the last year and a half, 2 years?
Do you know, I don't think we have seen that actually. I think we haven't particularly struggled with retention. I think we have seen the Zoom challenges where people can they can be talking to you and regularly on the phone, but you don't realize how lonely people are feeling. Perfectly professional, normal adult people are feeling pretty lonely after the last 2 or 3 years. So that we've noticed, and it can surprise you sometimes. You sort of find someone has a reaction that reflects that, but we haven't had a problem really with holding on to people resigning. And we must be too much fun to work for, so they don't want to resign.
It's interesting that you said that, and I don't know if there's been any research on it, but it was one of the things you said earlier sort of connected me to that, which is if a lot of the people that work in the group are passionate about what the business does, maybe that helps with the retention side of things, right? Because they're, to the point you made, you could see it in your face, right? The joy of going to work every day. Sure, it's passion of serving customers and all that, but sailing's in your blood. The idea that you get to work on the thing that you love to work on. I wonder if there's a lot of that in the business. Maybe that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that in the business. For sure, we have quite a lot of people that don't sail and have no exposure to sailing, and so on. But I still think that making a product that you can kind of, picture across to my left, making a product that's so visual and, makes such an impression when you kind of finish it. I think people get quite proud about that. And I think, even if it's not sailing, it's that kind of thing. We make a physical thing. One of the great things about manufacturing, isn't it? You make a physical thing, which at the end of the day, you can handle and hold and share and see and celebrate and all that stuff. And I think, if it's not the sailing, which I'm sure it is for lots of people, for the people it's not, it's probably that kind of stuff, the culture.
Yeah, the culture for sure. How do you think about, one of the things you talked about with the Zoom is sort of staying in touch with people, certainly have seen that, and cultural maintenance, certainly on that. But as the business grows and people change, maybe I should take one step back before I ask the second question, which is how would you describe the culture that you've built and are trying to maintain at North Sales? Or across the whole group?
Well, I think we've developed quite a lot in the last 5-7 years, and maintaining culture is always a challenge. I think the business, there was a phrase that not my predecessors, not me, came up with, which was they called we call the businesses in each country, we call them a loft essentially, which is a sail loft. So they call the leaders of the loft tigers, and they called them the North Tigers. And actually North Sales is not about North the direction. It was founded by a guy called Lowell North. And Lowell North used the name the North Tigers. And he said, hey, we're going to employ these people who are going to be inspirational leaders in the sport and in their lofts. And, we're going to back them, and we're going to, like lots of businesses in the day when there wasn't technology, you very much relied on having that North Star and then letting them get on with it. And I think the business has evolved, over the last 40 years very much in that image. And, we still have a lot of really motivated people around the world who've got, not just in the sailing space, but in technical spaces, technical skills where they're really, very competent, and they're quite sort of self-motivated when there's a North Star. And we've been as a business through, we're private equity owned now, We were owned by an American family for a very long time. We've been through some change since we became private equity owned, which has been really good overall for the business, because we used to be a business which was based in the US and a franchise business which was based in Europe. And we've now brought all of that under one umbrella, which lets the technical communication between the businesses or the parts of the business, different geographies, flow much more fluidly than it ever did in olden days. But the challenge is to keep the entrepreneurial spark. And that's a constant battle. You have to, we examine ourselves. You always get people saying, hang on, it doesn't quite feel like it used to feel, and you've got to find ways so it does feel like it used to feel, and you use, being positive communication, trying to sort of, get together often enough that we can all feel that we are all still the same team. You use financial incentives, whatever it might be, any trick you can think of to kind of keep everybody heading towards that North Star, which at the end of the day is giving people a great sailing experience.
How do you get people to think about giving people a great sales experience, but do it in a way that's profitable to maintain the business?
I think that's quite a subtle thing. You just do it by, it's kind of the way that you communicate, the way that you act, the kind of frequency with which you use kind of, if you like, performance. I was going to say financial, but I just want to say performance context to kind of discussion about, performance or getting the business to perform, So, you don't just talk about the technical shape of a sale without talking about what it costs to make. Because we can make the world's best sale for the most expensive price there is, but a lot of people can't afford that.
Yeah.
And you still want those guys to have an incredible sailing experience. So we talk about having the right product for the right price. And, it's just about getting the balance right. And we get it wrong sometimes. We kind of get, you can imagine we got private equity owners. Sometimes you kind of get a bit over financial.
Mm-hmm.
Other times you get a bit over product.
Yeah,
and it's about just moving backwards and forwards between those avenues and, hopefully taking the business forward. And I think we're in, COVID's been a funny time, and it affected the sailing industry in an interesting way, which is the sport is a mixture of cruising, social kind of, enjoyment sailing and racing sailing, where, the sailing is still the heart of it, but it's about winning a race. Mm-hmm. And the social cruising piece was what everybody migrated to in COVID. Basically, I'm sure from, you go and look on the water, you can see there's never been so many boats out there. Every boat that was in a marina has been being used in the last 2 years when they really weren't, which has been phenomenal for that cruising part of the sport. All sorts of people have got back in their boats and gone sailing again, or boating, whatever it might be. The thing that didn't happen was the racing part of the sailing, because it got caught by all the team sports bans that, they happen in different ways.
No social distancing on a racing sailboat, that's for sure.
Right. And they happen in different ways all over the world. So there's no one rule that sort of, every country banned racing. But in the beginning, every country banned racing pretty much. And last year, there was very little racing, and a lot of the racing is international, so people flying around the world, and none of that happened. So the racing scene didn't really happen, which had a knock-on effect, which meant those racing sailors went to get their sailing fix from cruising, but from a business point of view, the racing scene is quite important to the, we sell speed as a part of our sailing package, and
higher ticket items, more revenue per sale significantly.
Right.
On
so
that,
we didn't have that part going on, and so we didn't have that part of our business taking place. And I've slightly forgotten where I was going with the whole story about that at this point. But so it's been I was going to say it's sort of changed the business over that time. We've developed our cruising products a lot, and we're now getting back to racing. So everybody's back gangbusters again, and the business is humming.
Yeah. When you talked about this kind of conversion from a family-owned business to a private equity-backed business, you touched on a little bit the juxtaposition, right? Sometimes you're a little too heavy product, sometimes you're a little too heavy financial. I wonder, market consolidation, PE investments in businesses is affecting all industries, manufacturing certainly no exception. And I wonder, if you might want to share with the audience, like, how did you thread the needle of explaining the transition to employees? How has it been perceived? How is it looking at keeping that balance between getting the financial performance, but also continuing to make great product that feeds passionate sailors what they need?
Gosh, well, so I can't necessarily give you the perfect answer on North Sales because I actually wasn't in charge of North Sales at the point when the new PE firm came in. But I have a different perspective, which I did used to work in PE back in my days in London. So I have a kind of perspective from that. I mean, the answer comes down to, I think both things can mesh incredibly well together. You know, the great thing about, investment firms is they have investment. So if you want to invest funds and grow the business, you can invest funds and grow the business. Of course, you have to come up with a good business case as to why you do that. But hey, you should want to do that as a good businessman anyway. And then the other thing I'd say is finding the right partner in these things is totally critical. And we were my effective boss, who's Tom Whidden, who's the not quite the founder of North Sales, but certainly the heart and soul of North Sales for the last 50 years. I mean, he had a business partner in the Kohler family, which is the same family as you see on the bathroom toilet fittings and so on. And they were our shareholders for many, many years, and they were a family investor, but they were hugely supportive of technology and growing the business using technology. And I think, Tom very smartly, worked with them to make smart investments in technology, which is what's got North to the front of the queue in terms of sale makers and all the other products that we make that come off sale making. We're known for being the most technical sale maker. We innovated. I wasn't here at the time, so I don't claim it, but I claim it by being here now. We innovated. The computer design of sales to start with. We used computers design sales when other people were using a pen and paper and drawing them as an art form. We innovated the computer manufacture of sales, computer CNC control of sale manufacture. We innovated composite sales, which are making sales from the basic raw materials. So all of that came out in a period when we were owned by effectively an investment family, and then 6 years ago, we changed hands because that investment, unfortunately, the long-standing patriarch of the family passed away, and the investment family wanted to take a little bit of a lower key step in terms of our business, and we changed hands to a new investor. But our new investor has Tom was smart picking our new investor, and he found an investor who has an incredibly passionate sailor behind it. And so we have now an investor and a passionate sailor, and and he's a Brit too. So hey, I have a bit of commonality with that. So, but I think the trick is finding the right one for where you are, and find the right one for where you are, and I think it can work out. And I won't tell you that we haven't had lumps and bumps in our relationships with our investors or in the way that people view our investors, because people are always scared of the unknown. But I think we're in a fantastic space right now. The business is going forward, coming out of COVID as strongly as it could possibly be coming out of it. And I'm super optimistic about, what the next 5 or 10 years brings.
That's exciting. One thing you kind of made me think of there is, a business coach of mine says to me all the time, first who, then what. Right, the who is always the more important thing than the what, and you really pulled on that. And whether it's people that are working in the business, whether it's the who we have as clients or who we have as investors, the who matters so much more than the what, because the who is going to be the thing that's the constant. The what can change.
Yeah. I always mine's recruit for attitude, train for skill.
There you go.
Which I stole that from somebody else.
Yeah, that's been around. Exactly.
But it's the same thing.
I want to talk a little about the technology component of what you just said, because it's so crucially important for businesses of all stripes to think about constantly innovating and embracing the new technologies that are out there. So I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you think about continuing that tradition of taking advantage of new technologies that exist. You talked about CNC manufacturing, you talked about computer-aided drafting, innovations in their day, but both of those are not innovations by today's standards. And I think it's so awesome to talk about something as old school as sailing, right? I mean, they sailed to find North America, right? I mean, sailing is old by any stretch. Not quite as old as the wheel, but probably not much behind it. And I just wonder, you've just said that you got to the front of the line, the head of the pack, the front of the queue, as it were, by investing in technology. Just talk about how you think of that and continue to push that innovation forward in your business.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the fortunate things about being in North is it has this kind of technical heritage. It was the first to do most of the things in the sport, or in sail making, and if you look at our mast making business, the same, the first to do most of the things in mast making. We use innovative methods to make our powerboats. So the whole culture of the business is about innovation. I think it's been fed by the group of people, those tigers I referred to earlier, who were all ambitious for how to grow, and therefore, I describe it as having their heads up and out the boat. They like to look around and see what was going on in the rest of the world, and being quite smart people, they often saw opportunity quite early on when those innovations were happening. There've been a number of key people through the business, some of whom are still in the business and some of who aren't still in the business, who've been really critical to sort of driving those things. We have a chap who created the first sail design program, and is still with us and massively influential in terms of taking on that code and developing it to, innovate in ever finer ways. I think you mentioned the America's Cup earlier on, which is the premier race series in the sport of sailing for billionaires. There's lots of racing for normal people like me, but there's also this sort of America's Cup for billionaires.
It's probably, was the America's Cup the most widely known race? People that don't know anything about sailing have heard of the America's Cup. Is that just because we're in America, or is globally is that?
No, I think it's globally the most well-known, the pinnacle of the sport, the most well-known. Not necessarily the pinnacle of every person's representation of the sport, but the pinnacle of the sport. Maybe people know Olympic sailing as well a little bit, but, for sure, the America's Cup, and that... that has actually forced the technological developments in the sport, and you said North has been at the winning end of that regatta for quite a number of years.
Yeah,
and the reason,
according to the internet, if it's to be believed, every winner since 1987 has been sailing on a North Sail sail.
So it is to be believed, and the reason is because of the technical innovation. You take a sport which you can regard as being quite open with quite a lot of outside influences, and but if you can actually develop a faster boat through technology, you can have those outside influences on a faster boat, and then obviously you tend to win more often than not. And,
sure.
and that kind of culture comes through the business, and has led to IT development. We've got a few things on the table, where there's physical hardware developments that have kind of gone and have developed. The other thing which is quite influential is the America's Cup. Its sport itself has a lot of money, rightly or wrongly, a lot of money spent on it by some often very wealthy individuals, sometimes kind of corporate sponsorships and so on. And that really encourages innovation. And one of the things that North does is it has an incredible pool of designers within the group that are responsible for a large part of the innovation, in terms of sail shapes and the way that we design the sail shapes. And quite typically they get seconded into the race teams for the America's Cup themselves, and they'll sort of leave North Sails for a bit. And the same in the mast side, they'll leave North Sails for a bit, or Southern Spars as our mast business is called, and they'll join those America's Cup teams, and they'll work deeply embedded in those teams of a specific project to make that whatever type of boat it is at that time go faster, which might be IT based, or it might be material science based, and it'll be backed by
angling, masting, the way you want to do it, height,
anything you want to have, and often almost money no object.
Yeah, right.
Which of course a commercial business doesn't have that luxury of money no object, but money no object to win that cup, which is not that attractive, the ugly ewer as they describe it, but there's a huge investment, a very, very, very clear finishing line, which is trying to win the regatta. So
nothing focuses innovation like a specific goal,
right? And
so back to your North Star
concept. We're incredibly lucky that at the end of those America's Cup cycles, we call them, those people come back into our business again and then cross fertilize those ideas either directly or just having learned a lot about what's out there, and bring them back into the business and help us to kind of move on to the next phase of innovation. And you talk about, CAD design of sales is now kind of well established. Well, CAD design of sales is well established, but the fluid dynamics that go around sales, so modeling the air as a liquid or whatever, is not well developed. You say, oh yeah, there are aeroplanes out there, but aeroplanes fly at 500 miles an hour. A sailboat flies at somewhere between 10 miles an hour and 50 miles an hour. So very different dynamics. And then the latest development is artificial intelligence and using artificial intelligence to develop the tools. And the last America's Cup that took place was in New Zealand a year and a half ago, nearly a year ago. Feels like a year and a half ago. Where's that time gone? But artificial intelligence was really prevalent in the victory that the team, it was actually the New Zealand team that won, but using North Sails. And they used artificial intelligence to explore a whole ton of opportunities of improving that boat without actually having to build the boat. And that now is proliferating out into how we think about our design tools and, what we can do with our business. And, we know a lot about, from sales, we know a lot about what I call flexible composites. So a sail material, which used to be a woven material, is now a glued together combination of glue and fiber. And we can use that in a whole bunch of areas outside of sail making. So, all of this stuff kind of keeps developing.
So let me ask you, super fascinating. Talk about getting close to your customer. If someone in your business can embed in the customer while they're trying to figure out how to optimize the use of your product, and then you get to come back to the business and bring that firsthand knowledge back, not just of what the customer wants, but how the item performs and so on. Unbelievably powerful. I can envision how that would be so helpful. Let me ask it this way. If you weren't in sailing, let's say we put you in charge of a medical device manufacturer for whatever, you're making stomach staples or whatever. And I said, Richard, thinking about how you leveraged innovation at North Sails, how would you, and sort of focus on that and drove it, is there any lessons learned that you could drive to another business? How could someone take that? I don't know if I'm asking the question artfully or if you're kind of following me, but there's just so much power in innovation. And I wonder, you guys are doing it so well. What could someone take it who doesn't have the advantage?
But I think you can get passionate about anything. I used to work for a company that made artificial grass, made
turf.
What do you call it? Yeah, AstroTurf, you call it.
There you go. Sure.
So, and it's totally possible to get excited about the technical developments in AstroTurf. You can get excited about anything if you're that kind of person. Sure, still some people don't get excited about it, but you can get excited about it. So, I think innovation is about having, just like every other part of the business, passionate people who want to innovate, and we go out and try and find those people and try and give them the opportunity to innovate, and it is a challenge because if you're a manufacturing business, you want to make stuff that makes you money as well as innovating.
You're exactly where I was going to go. So, I think people say in business, you can see where their priorities are by where they put the money, right? So when you think about the budget at the beginning of the year and allocating resources, how do you think about investing in innovation without necessarily a known ROI at the end?
Yeah, that's a trick. And those I'm going to say the unknown ROI ones are always more satisfactory when they're funded by the America's Cup teams.
Yeah, exactly, which is why I asked about other businesses, because the AstroTurf people might not have that opportunity. There's no America's Cup AstroTurf race that I'm aware of.
But sometimes there is, partnerships with the universities. Universities will fund your research or some of your research or whatever. We've been working with a guy who went to university at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and the reason we got involved with him is because he did some projects at university that are totally applicable to our industry, and surprising when you look around the world. You can find people doing, you mentioned the staples guy or the stomach staples or whatever. I bet if you hunted hard enough, you can find someone who's kind of motivated to do some stuff on that's not quite in the business. And so I think you have to look around for innovation, and sometimes you do need to just get your sort of neck out, stick it on the block, and go, okay, we're going to fund something that I can't see a return for, and that doesn't work right now. North in the past has done. We have our kind of premier technology is something called 3DI, which is a combination of three-dimensional molding a sail and making a sail by laminating together fibers and resins rather than making it using woven sort of sailcloth. And the step that went to actually doing that, there was no the process actually was innovated by the America's Cup, but when North actually bought the patents that went with that process, it didn't work. And the business invested, tens of millions of dollars in making that work at a production scale, where now we can make sails for a 300-foot boat that are absolutely vast, as big as a basketball court, in one go on a giant mold. That all of that kind of came within the business, and it's still a bit step by step, but it also involved somebody with big balls at the time saying, "Hey, we're going to do this," and that's about having the right investor, who says, sometimes you need to make big leaps, not just little steps. And
put your head on the block and see what happens. Take that moonshot.
Right, and if you got the right investor, they'll do that. And especially the investment community. I mean, that's what they're all about.
Right, that's right. Yeah. And that's where having a good investment partner makes a ton of sense. So I want to dovetail back to Connecticut and then into technology a little bit. So you guys moved into Steel Point Harbor in Bridgeport.
Yep.
Move's complete.
No.
Okay.
75% complete.
Yep.
We're all physically in there, and we've been in there since July, but we're still definitely knocking the rough edges off the office space and getting it fully operational, which you'd expect. But it's going to be amazing. I mean, the facility's going to be amazing. The Christoph family, who are behind the Steel Point Marina, have done a bunch of marina developments down in Florida and so on, have done really great jobs. For my passion, they're sailors. They own sailboats, so they kind of understand us as a kind of a tenant for them, but also they're motivated to try and make the marina a kind of active sailing marina, not just a kind of passive storage marina. So I hope we'll have regattas and all sorts of things from, races and things from that venue, maybe not this year, but, we're going to have them in the future. So
how was the facility's nice?
It's fantastic. So what you want with a sail finishing loft, because we finish the sails rather than make the first part of the sails in Bridgeport, you need a big open space with plenty of clear span, so you can lay very big things out. And when you're not laying one very big thing out, you can lay a lot of smaller things out without having to kind of work around piles and things. And it used to be a big. We're not the first owners of the space. It used to be a big open. I think boat building hangar, and it's just a vast open space. It's fantastic. It's going to be really good.
That's fantastic. And I know that you've leveraged a partnership with CCAT, the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology, and actually how we actually got introduced. I wonder if you might talk about, the value of that, what you found in that, and why it's a benefit to the North Sales Group.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's that it's the CCAT group. It's the first time I've ever come across such a kind of well-equipped, I don't know what the right description for it in US terms, state-owned, government-owned, whatever kind of, or invested in organization, that's there to promote something, like that, and I'd never come across it, and they approached me and said, you should come up and see the facilities. And we went up and saw the facilities up in Hartford, and it was an eye-opener. So, we're always looking for ways to make our, we are genuinely a passionate American company, but labor costs are high in America these days to compare to some other parts of the world. But one of the things that we've been taught over the last 2 years is having a supply chain that's disparate across the world can be challenging. So, hey, we knew it before, we know it more now. We want to bring business back to the US. In order to do that, you have to do it efficiently. And to have people who are specifically looking at ways at being more efficient in manufacturing, it's a little bit like you were saying, sometimes you need someone to take the moonshot. Well, having those people that can, when you see some of the machinery that they have, it's truly mind-blowing machinery. You can then envision what you can do with it. If you didn't see that machinery, or you saw it at a trade show where the pressure's on and the kind of, it's completely different. So what it does is opens up, where they've taken the decision to focus on certain areas. They've got some incredible additive manufacturing stuff to make, some really sophisticated parts. And they've got some really interesting scanning technology, which is interesting to us, because we're trying to check that our sails, huge things, great big sail shapes, are accurately represented, and that kind of technology is really helpful. And they've got people who know how to run it and have, played around with the toys, so they know how to kind of use the tools. So that's really helpful. And then they have a composites piece where we've shared common paths. We don't do so much hard composites in the US, but we have hard composites within the group, typically done out in New Zealand, and they're innovating using robotic manufacturing, tape laying, and our technology, which we do have in the US, is all about additive tape laying. So some of the stuff that they're doing there is, it's very similar to us, other on different scales, and the sort of software they're using and the way they use it and the environment they do it in has been really interesting. I mean, we're at the beginning of our journey with them, I think, rather than the end. So I can't say we've done tons of stuff, making things together or whatever, but I'm sure we will.
Yeah, listen, I think it's really tremendous. I wanted to just bring it up because I think you're so right that it's one thing to read about something. It's one thing to peep it at a trade show when you've got 50 other people looking at it, and half the time they're just trying to sell you what the item is and get you to invest in it. But to be able to go to CCAT and walk around and you can do some prototyping projects.
Yeah, you can make stuff there. And they have some really, really sophisticated pieces of equipment.
And
really
people that know how to operate it. So you could take an idea or say, hey, like this is something we're trying to improve on and bring it there. And really that collaboration, I think, is just so crucial. It's been a piece that I think has been missing in the U.S. In Connecticut, but in the U.S. in general for a long time, which is understanding that private-public partnerships really can make a huge difference. And thinking about that in a new way, I think, is important. So
I've seen it happen in previous lives in previous countries, where people have started a kind of a composite specialism, and you see industry grow up around it. Now, I mean, it's now looking back 30 years. I mentioned my chemistry degree. My first exposure to, I was at Southampton University. My first exposure to a composites business was a business that's on an island nearby. And I remember them having a little composites specialism cluster there in those days. And it's now a series of vast companies gathered around a kind of huge business complex there. It was nothing in those days. And it was all kind of started by one person who did a little bit like the CCAT thing and got some technology that was shared and got like-minded people who, when they found a problem, they kind of shared across the companies, not just within the company. And it's a big operation now, not in one company. It's a series of companies. It's a big cluster.
Yeah, and those clusters are like super helpful. Yeah. Well, Richard, it has been really awesome talking to you about all this technology stuff and hearing about North Sales. You ready for some rapid fire round of questions to round out our interview?
Sure.
All right. The first one's very American, this question. So I'll ask you, and I'm not sure if you're going to have an answer. Red Sox or Yankees?
I don't have an answer.
What's
baseball?
So. Yeah, exactly. At least you knew what sport it was. Exactly.
My son's at university in Boston, so he'd probably say I've got to go for the Red Sox.
All right, yeah. There you go. I like that. Very good. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Starbucks, every time.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Staycation.
Wow, that was surprising. I thought you were going to say exotic. iPhone or Android?
I have both, but I only have to use the iPhone these days. Otherwise, I have nobody who can explain how to work it sitting next to me.
Sports car or SUV?
Oh, sports car of choice.
Of choice. What's your sports car of choice?
I'd have a Porsche.
Porsche. Yeah. Do you have a favorite business book?
Oh, goodness me. I do. I have lots of favorite business books, but can I think of the names of any of them right now? The Culture Engine.
The Culture Engine.
Yeah. I can't remember the author's name, but it's a superb book.
Got it. That's a good one. If you could do anything, Richard, other than be CEO of the North Sales Group, and you had to be something else, could be anything in the whole world, what would you do?
I've got a sailing one.
Yeah.
So my sailing one is I'd have an Olympic gold medal.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. I admire anybody that can get that far in the sport that I love. So I mean, that's that. If I could do anything else, what would I do? Gosh, I don't know. I could do 100 different things. I enjoy all sorts of things. I have very broad interest.
But the gold medal, that would be that'd be snap your fingers, gold medal.
That's an easy decision.
I like that. What's something, Richard, that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think helped springboard you to all the success that you've had?
Oh, that's easy and obvious, which is you can get anything you want if you work hard enough at it.
That's a great one. What's something that you learned later in your career or later in your life that if you would go back and tell young Richard, and if he'd listen to you, you think it'd have a real positive impact on his life?
Yeah, don't be afraid to change direction if you pick the wrong one.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You got a story to go with that?
Yeah, I have.
I'd love to hear it.
I did a chemistry degree and I should have not done a chemistry degree. Bizarrely, having told you about how useful it's been to my life, maybe I'm wrong about my analysis of it, but I think there's so many fascinating things you can study at college that I don't use it that much. Maybe use it 1% in my life. And I think there would have been some things that maybe I could have studied if I changed direction and done something else, which would have been more useful. So I wasn't brave enough in those days. These days I'd be absolutely brave enough. But
you're saying you would have gotten started and realized this isn't for me.
Yeah, and I would have changed direction. I say to all my oldest kids just gone to college, if you're doing the wrong course, change. Don't do the wrong course because you think dad might be upset about another 100 grand or something like that, because that in the scheme of life is nothing. It might seem like a lot, but it's nothing. Doing the right thing, is the change direction.
Doing the right thing is always the right thing. Listen, Richard, it has been honestly a real pleasure having you on. I know it's a little late, but welcome to Connecticut.
Thank you.
Certainly happy to have you here and very happy to have you on the episode. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Great to be on.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct, a CompassMSP company.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.